The importance of bird identification. No, I think it's probably a red shoulder. That was the taller, calmer fellow in a world-weary tone speaking. But it doesn't have red shoulders. This guy was shorter and was heavily strapped with a cumbersome congregation of cameras, scopes, binoculars, field guides, and various tanks and canisters presumably containing liquids and foodstuffs. Tall man gave a gentle reply. Well, immature birds have virtually no red on the shoulder, and there is no December record for broadwings in Sevier County. Look, I can see the wide band on his tail, came the slightly anguished reply. Well, if you can see his tail in that brush, then you've got better eyes than me, came the patient answer to that. But before this bitter conversation could proceed further, a shot rang out, and an aggravated sigh was emitted from one of the copiously bundled ladies at the back of the little group of bird watchers, and she eased herself down into the dry leaves of the forest floor. Everybody else crouched down. That sounded like a mini ball from an old Confederate pistol, said the tall fellow, as he drew a Glock from a holster at the small of his back. Could be our man, said the shorter fellow, drawing an HK from underneath his coat. Is that you, Wilson? The tall guy called out. Not this time, copper, came a harsh reply from startlingly nearby in the deep forest brush. Give it up, Wilson, yelled the short guy. It's time to correct the record. An arrow whistled over their heads and hit home with a thunk, and a big bearded man dressed like a deep woods homeless person stood up and fell backwards into the vines. The two armed ornithologists stepped forward and looked down at the bearded giant. The other members of the bird-watching band fell in behind, all with arms hung low with fingers containing regulation 9mm. You're Peterson, aren't you? The downed man said to the tall guy. And I'm Sibley, said the shorter. We're here to correct the record, one way or the other. It's too late, said the downed man. I did what I did. I was never sure. I couldn't have been sure. No one could. The field marks were not definitive. I knew that. Tall man said, if you confess to the mistaken ID, we can correct the record, and we can be out of your forest, and no one else will ever know we were here. The reply from Wilson, it's too late. I can never live down the shame. Sibley, the record can be corrected, Wilson. Section 1, Paragraph 2, Subsection B of the County Checklist Guidelines specifically provides for a remedy for this exact situation. Wilson shook his head pitifully in the leaves. Peterson shook his head sadly and intoned, in that case, as the Chief Enforcement Officer of the Cornell Sapsucker Woods Central Office Checklist Division, I hereby accuse and arrest you for altering the word possible to the word likely on the 1954 Sevier County Christmas Bird Count Checklist for the broad-winged hawk entry, thus causing countless birders, amateur and professional alike, to believe that such a bird likely had been present, and to speculate on why the animal might have discontinued its intercontinental migration to South America. Was it injured? Was it a pioneer in the expansion of the species' winter range? Was there something here in these very woods, a mineral in a spring perhaps, that provided the individual with powers to resist the cold and fog that none of its cousins had ever been able to? Peterson, that's enough, Sibley interrupted. Peterson pulled himself together and said, Wilson, how do you plead? Wilson, in the name of my namesake, Alexander Wilson, whose poetry has guided me and whose honesty I have not lived up to, I hear... But Wilson had expired. Sibley, that's too bad. I had a feeling he might have been close to confessing. I wonder why he did it anyway. Peterson, could have been for the glory, I suppose. I prefer to think it was a simple mistake that got out of hand. Sibley, what's with the arrow? Peterson, yeah, that's a Cherokee arrow. There are still a few old-timers in these woods who descended from people who didn't leave on the Trail of Tears. They sometimes send messages to the current denizens. We weren't the only ones looking for Wilson. In the early 50s, he reported a possible Ivory Billed Woodpecker here in the county. From the Cornell point of view, doubtful is still possible. Even very doubtful is not a violation. The Cherokee are not so forgiving. They accept full responsibility for the extinction of ivory bills, having buried thousands of the long white bills in their burial mounds. That they accept their responsibility is a lesson to us all. Of course, the Singer Sewing Machine Company in New Jersey didn't have any Cherokees on its board and might have been able to save the few remaining ivory bills in the Singer tract of hardwood bottomland in Louisiana. So there is shared responsibility. But the last certified ivory bill was seen there in 1944. There was no ivory bill to be seen in the early 50s in Sevier County, Tennessee. The only way to avoid these kinds of mistakes is to set the record straight. Sibley, well, we'll have to file a report. Too bad about Margaret. She was a good agent. Peterson, yeah, like her namesake. She did a lot to correct the records for Melaspiza melodia. I never even knew her real name.